Prime Minister Dean Barrow reported to the House on Monday that among the government's priorities are attaining the consolidation needed to achieve lasting fiscal and debt sustainability. The Prime Minister informed that fresh financing for the budget will be at its lowest since he started office, even as the external public debt is at its highest.
At the close of January 2017, external public debt amounted to 70% of GDP, some $2.3 billion, and domestic debt totaled 22% of GDP, some $750 million. The interest cost of these obligations is projected at $104.6 million for this fiscal year and is expected to rise slightly to $109.1 million during fiscal year 2017-2018.
The breakdown of the external debt shows that most of it is for three principal creditors: the bondholders of the formerly 2038, now 2034 bonds renegotiated last week, international financial partners such as the Caribbean and Inter-American Development Bank, and the republics of Taiwan and Venezuela. In the case of the bonds, the Prime Minister spoke of a debt trap that he said hamstrung his government's ability to borrow should they choose to.
Our predecessors, those across the aisle, who trafficked in high-interest bonds and promissory notes, laid a debt trap before leaving office. They drove up the public debt from 48% of GDP in 1998 when we left to 89% of GDP in 2008. This deprived their successors, this deprived us, of the critical option of borrowing, which, when done prudently, is one of the most effective tools to combat recession and economic crisis. The PUP's pace of public borrowing, on average, was a double-up and triple-up approach. It got out BTL. Borrow $2 for every dollar of economic growth. Borrow $3 for every new dollar of revenue. Clearly a case of irrationality, cognitive dissonance, and corrupt use of unmonitored debt funds to fill ministerial and crony pockets.
Later, the Prime Minister would say in specific relation to PetroCaribe that he still has no regrets on spending despite the legitimate questions in the public.
I don't regret for 1 minute the spending of the PetroCaribe funds. I think the infrastructure and social programs that those monies funded were well worth funding. They've improved the quality of life, and they were consistent with the sort of objective of Comandante Chavez's vision. And so there's no regret there at all.
And while the Prime Minister touted advances in the Superbond renegotiation, at home, the credit system still suffers from high liquidity despite government intervention.
On the monetary front, the broad measure of money supply expanded by 2.8%. This was attributable to a surge in borrowing by government and a 1.6% growth in lending to the private sector. The net foreign assets of the banking system contracted due to lower export earnings, the substantial payments for BTL, and the purchase of the local branch of First Caribbean International Bank. The credit unions also increased lending by 9.2% or $48.9 million. New issue of government securities targeted at financial institutions and institutional investors made virtually no dent in the high level of banking system liquidity. Consequently, the weighted average interest rates on new loans and deposits declined further, resulting in the weighted average interest rate spread decreasing by 13 basis points to 7.63%.
It seems that despite the $100 million in interest payments, there seems no end in sight to reducing the debt figures that threaten to choke Belize's economy. Aaron Humes reporting for News 5.